Hey everybody out there on the internet, it's me, Sam Miller, aka the guy who runs this channel, and today I want to have a little bit of a serious talk with you. For those of you who don't know, I have a PhD. I know, shock and awe, this, with all of this, it has a PhD. But it happened. And so what I want to share with you today is something that I started working on over 6 years ago. Some of you, if you've been with this channel for a while, remember this. My name is Sam, aka Professor Equine. Wow, yeah, 6 years ago. And I ain't gotten much prettier since. But what you gonna do? Anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because since that video, a number of things have happened. First of all, I got my PhD.
Samuel Miller, Doctor of Philosophy, Communication and Public Discourse, presented by Dr. Timothy Pash.
Yay me. Second, I just was told by the Journal of Men Studies that the article that I've been working on with them has finally been acknowledged for publication. So in the fall of this year, the Journal of Men Studies will be publishing an article entitled Rebooting Men and Ponies, Discordant Masculinity in the Brony Fandom. That's what I want to talk about today, but due to issues that might seem like I'm essentially giving away the article, I'm not going to give you the whole thing, but as much as I can without them getting mad. Because part of what happens in academics is, yay, I've gotten this thing published, which is great for me. Woo, lines on my CV.
I smoke so much weed you wouldn't believe, and I get more ass than a toilet seat.
But the problem is maybe a grand total of 6 to 10 people will read it in my lifetime, and I think other people should know about it. So, when I find out when it gets published, I'll put it in the description below, a link to it. But the only problem with that is you gotta be in college and have access to databases to see it. So, no, I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do. So I'm going to give you a Cliff Notes version of what this thing is about. Because this is a lot of gobbledygook that I'm going to try and make interesting. So let's get into it.
I'm not joking. This is my job.
And I somehow convinced some other school to hire me as a professor. That's what I love about what I do. I get to watch cartoons and call it research. But seriously, let's get into some of this article and really talk about what's going on. So just like in any other research article, I got to give you a bit of a history of what's going on.
This is boring.
For those of you who may not be familiar, My Little Pony started off as a toy line in the early 1980s, which was then followed up by a cartoon show. Needless to say, the show and the toy lines have experienced various ups and downs, and in 2010, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic was released. What makes Friendship is Magic different than the other incarnations of the show is what fan base emerged from it. Typically, My Little Pony is supposed to be targeted towards young girls. However, this time around, a large emerging fan base of young adult men started coming out of the woodwork. They took on the name Bronies, composition of the terms brother and pony, to create the fandom name. What separates Bronies from other fandoms is how they conduct themselves. Typically, Bronies take on the mantra of love and tolerance. Ever since the early days of the fandom, this has been a popular saying. And it's not just something that they say out of irony's sake, it is something that they genuinely believe. At first, a number of researchers were quoting them as something as neo-sincere, which is the concept that you are watching this almost ironically, but it's to the point where it's now a sincere effort to be watching this and taking the messages to heart. And believe it or not, there have been other pony researchers out there. It's not just me. For instance, there are researchers who have compared the show to Aesop's Fables. There have been studies trying to figure out what the demographics of the show are. And there are others who are primarily looking at some of the behavioral aspects of the fandom. However, the one thing that I would have thought would have jumped out more than anything is, what exactly does this mean for gender now? This is something that is atypical. Young adult men are actively engaging in a show that is meant for very young girls. And they love it. I mean, to the point where they have conventions now. For instance, BronyCon will have attendances upwards of 10,000 people. 10,000 people showing up to celebrate peace, love, and pony. That's something to think about. So the method that I used for this back when I first started was a survey, an online survey that I created at the University of North Dakota. And I amassed 1,200 participants. Sifting through 1,200 participants with textual data is going to be kind of hard. If it was nothing but numbers, it'd be a little bit easier, but my work was mixed methods, and so it took me a while. And so part of what I was trying to understand is, in particular, what does this fandom do in terms of masculinity through its subculture? To understand what this fandom now means for masculinity, we got to do a little bit of review on what masculinity studies have been doing for the last 30 or so years. In the mid-1980s, Connell and Messerschmitt had created a concept of masculinity known as hegemonic masculinity. In their work, they discussed the idea that there's an ideal masculinity that men try to aspire to. But if you don't hit that, then you are put in a hierarchy. So the way this hierarchy works is if someone does their best to assimilate to the ideal, which in and of itself is impossible to be the ideal other than Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is always the ideal man, but all joking aside, those individuals who try to ascribe for that will be higher up in the hierarchy, whereas those individuals who may do things that are considered effeminate will be marginalized to the lower end. And for the next 20 years, this is pretty much how masculinity studies is understood. From there, around the turn of the millennium, we start to see the emergence of what we would call hybrid masculinities. These are masculinities which find concession, which is something that hegemonic masculinity can do, is make concessions for things that may not match up very well within the model of ideal masculinity. So what this allows for is for individuals who may not have all the resources to make it to the ideal representation of manliness to have their own smaller versions within the context of their situation, whether they live in a rural area or a metropolitan area, or even in prison. These things can change. So even in the absence of women, how is masculinity configured? And that's part and parcel to hegemonic masculinity. So you have this dominant model still, but there are these concessions that are made according to context. Then around 2006, Eric Anderson creates what is then called inclusive masculinity. Inclusive masculinity allows men to essentially do things that are generally considered effeminate, but without any of the repercussions. This is something within hegemonic masculinity would be impossible. Hegemonic masculinity did a lot of gender policing, so anytime that there was an infringement upon the effeminate, those masculine individuals were then downgraded further into the hierarchy. Anderson rationalizes these actions through the concept of homohysteria, which he claims during the time of Connell and Messerschmitt's writing of hegemonic masculinity was at an all-time high. Homohysteria is the notion that there is a fear of the homosexual, and therefore doing anything that would render you effeminate would automatically put you at the bottom. Anderson suggests that this homohysteria is at a low point, and now men can act effeminately without worry of repercussion. Since Anderson considers homohysteria to be at a low point in these contemporary times, he suggests that, because of this, men engaging in effeminate traits can be overlooked. Examples like men hugging each other, engaging in style choices where men normally didn't care about, the concept of manscaping, all now are considered regular manly things. However, this is problematic, and part of how this is answered is through what McCormick calls heterosexual recuperation. Heterosexual recuperation is the notion that men can engage in things so long as it is through the concepts of irony or conquestual means. I mean, just look at the terminology we've already used here in terms of ironic means. Manscaping, the idea that men shave down their body hair in order to achieve a certain look, which is something that men traditionally did not do up until the turn of the century. And so you start to see how there's this idea that there is some humor behind it to justify your means. However, there are other academics, such as O'Neill, Bridges, myself, who believe a lot of this is what we would consider post-feminism. For those of you who don't understand post-feminism, the best example that I can give you is the notion of post-racism. The notion of post-racism is the idea that since we elected an African American into office, racism is dead. For those of you who understand this, you know that's not true. The same thing goes with post-feminism. Now that there seems to be this idea that men and women are equal, that sexism is dead, and that the need for feminism no longer exists. And I would still argue that, yes, feminism is needed.
What in tarnation does that have to do with anything?
So this is where my research comes in. What I see with inclusive masculinity is a post-feminist gap. Yes, men are able to do things that are considered effeminate, but they do it in a joking manner. They do things because it's funny or they're using it for ironic purposes. That can be troubling because now you are still, even though you say and show that you are more inclined to do things that years ago you would never dream seeing a man do, it has to be done for near comedic purposes. So I named the concept after Discord, who is from My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. The reason why I named it after him is because Discord is a chimera. There's a lot of things going on with his body, as you can see. He has cloven hooves, he has a tail, he has 2 different style wings. There's a lot of different parts in there meshed together to create this being.
Fascinating article, yes. Don't let him come over. Please don't let him come over, please.
So at this point, I see masculinity as a mishmash of a lot of things. It's pieced together, kind of like Discord. And what it does is that it openly conflicts with what most people traditionally understand gender roles to be. Because it's brand new and something that most people don't understand, it's going to irritate a lot of people, kind of like what Discord does. So what Discord masculinity tries to do at this point is smooth over those post-feminist gaps that are inherent in inclusive masculinity, and it does so through the fandom's use of love and tolerance to make everyone feel welcome. There's no use of ironic recuperation in terms of the fandom either. They're not mocking ponies, they're not mocking women who enjoyed this prior to them. They are here just to enjoy the ponies. And so it has dealt with a number of those issues. Yes, we are finding more and more individuals are willing to infringe upon those gender barriers and try new things. However, it is a slow process. Is this the cure-all for it? No. I mean, it still has its own problems that it has to work out, but it does address a lot of problems that have been occurring in the past. The thing that sticks out to me is that I still find it humorous that it takes ponies, of all things, to show men that it's okay to share their feelings, to be inclusive of everybody, to be a friend. And that's something that you can't really take away from them. And so even though there are growing pains within this fandom, and whatever residual effects come out of this. Because even when this fandom's dead and gone, those who were in it will carry on those ideas into their own families when they have children, and they share those values with their children. And so you'll start to see this grow. This may be the start, and if it is, that's wonderful. And there you have it. A rather rough summary of what the article is about. If you like it, cool. I hope you find it, you read it. If you want to hang around and see the other dumb things I do here, cool beans too. But that's pretty much all I got. Bye.